Sergeant Dale Morrow deliberately and precisely, like a man, drove his boot into the wounded side of Emily Carter, checking if something was broken enough to discard. She screamed. He crouched down, grabbed her by the hair, and forced her face up to the rain until their eyes met. His gaze was empty, calm, the eyes of a man who had already accepted what he was doing. "Now you're a burden," he said, "and burdens are left behind." He released her skull into the mud as if throwing a stone. Around him, 12 soldiers watched. None moved, none spoke. They just turned and walked into the darkness. If you're watching this right now, subscribe to this channel and follow this story to the end, and leave a comment mentioning the city you're watching from. I'm curious how far this story has spread. The rain had been falling for 3 hours before Sergeant Dale Morrow made his decision. This decision was not made from strategic reasons, necessity, or even cold calculations supposedly taught in military training. It was driven by something more ancient and unsightly. It was cowardice hiding behind pragmatism, so the one committing it wouldn't have to face what he was truly doing. Emily Carter was 18 years old. 17 minutes ago, she was shot, and the sergeant who was supposed to take her home had just stepped away through the mud. She didn't scream after him. She had no breath. The bullet hit just below her right rib, grazing some internal organ, sending fiery stripes across her torso with each breath. She knew field medical procedures and understood it wasn't immediately fatal. She also knew that not fatal and survives were two entirely different categories, separated by an abyss that could engulf a person whole. She lay on her back in the ravine, staring at the sky. Lightning flashed through the clouds. A low, continuous rumble came from the east, like distant artillery fire, far enough that the body had not yet begun its countdown. She pressed her palm tightly to her side. "Okay," she said into the void, her voice quieter than she wished, rougher. "Okay, think." First, she assessed the situation. Not her feelings. Those would come later or maybe not at all. But for now, they were useless. She assessed her body. The right side was damaged, the left arm functioned, both legs responded. She could move if necessary. Movement would cost her blood. She couldn't afford to waste any, but staying still in an open ravine, where an enemy unit was somewhere in these mountains, was unbearable too. She needed cover. She needed to stop the bleeding. Beneath these two immediate problems, buried under shock, pain, and a particular cold that seeps to the bone when you're wet, wounded, and alone. Beneath all that, she needed to acknowledge the fact that Dale Morrow had looked her in the eye and left her to die. But that was for later. She rolled onto her left side and began to crawl. A granite ledge was 30 meters away. She noted it along the way. She noted everything on the way, always, because it was a habit her mind had developed over the past year. It was a shallow, rocky shelf jutting about 1-2 meters out from the slope. Deep enough she had to press against it to crawl under, but deep enough to shelter her from direct fire and, more importantly, from the rain that was now trying its hardest to wash her blood into the Montana soil. 30 meters. She reached it in 11 minutes. By the time she crawled under the ledge and lay on her back, her vision started doing something interesting at the edges, a kind of enlightenment and narrowing, which she recognized as early signs of beginning shock. She'd seen this in training. They taught her to fight it. "Name?" she whispered aloud. Verbalization helps the brain stay focused. Emily Rose Carter, serial number 774 Echo Charlie, born August 12. Current location, northeast quadrant of the Montana Highlands Coordinate Grid. November Mike 77. Altitude about 6,400 feet. Her fingers trembling, she unfastened her tactical vest. The first aid kit was still there. Morrow's people hadn't taken it from her, which meant either they were in too much of a hurry or they didn't think she would live long enough for it to matter. She was going to make them wrong. The field dressing was designed precisely for wounds like this, penetrating the abdomen, high velocity, uncertain depth. She knew the protocol. Fill the wound, apply pressure, maintain. She did this methodically, squeezing the sleeve of her jacket as the pain flared to a level she could barely comprehend calmly. When it was done, she lay still for 60 seconds, breathing in slow, measured rhythms taught by her first field instructor. For counts in, she whispered, For counts hold, for counts out. Her instructor was Sergeant Patricia Odom Pat. She had been the first person in Emily's military career to look at her. A 17-year-old girl arriving for mountain reconnaissance training with only a duffel bag, topographic memory, and stubbornness bordering on pathology, and say anything other than, "You don't belong here." Pat said, "You'll wear me out. I'm looking forward to that." Emily thought of Pat, now sitting under the shelter listening to the rain. And then she heard something else. It wasn't something else at first. It wasn't a sudden sound burst or unexpected revelation. It was more like a ringing in the ears that started about 20 minutes ago, about the time her blood pressure began acting unpredictably. The silence had shifted from the white noise of shock to something taking shape and direction. She heard footsteps, not close but far, maybe half a mile away, maybe a little more. Moving through the ravine to the north, stretching east to west about 300 meters from her position. Two groups of footsteps, she could distinguish them. One heavier with a practiced, steady rhythm like a man trained to patrol rugged terrain, and the other lighter, more uneven like a nervous or tired man or both. She froze. Her hearing had always been excellent. Everyone who worked with her had noted this at some point. Once she caught radio transmission through 200 meters of dense pine forest during a constant wind. Her sergeant instructor called it a gift. Her bunkmate, a young woman named Senior Sergeant Kim Torres, called it truly unsettling. Emily considered it useful and left it at that. But this was different. This was hearing with such detail that defied logical explanation. She could tell not just of footsteps but weight distribution. She heard the heavier step slightly shifted to the left. She heard through rain and wind the specific sound of nylon tape sliding across a bulletproof vest. She heard, or thought she heard, a faint electronic beep from a 2 times quickly pressed radio button. A signal to retreat. She pressed against the rock and did calculations. They were moving east to west across the northern ravine. This was the same direction her unit had retreated. Not following the retreat, they moved parallel, which meant they knew the retreat route and were positioning to block it, flank it, or hold prepared positions further west. Miller Crossing. The name emerged in her memory with cold clarity of something she wanted to mention but couldn't. Miller Bridge was a narrow bridge over a gorge, the only viable crossing for heavy equipment in the entire northeast quadrant. If you wanted to move significant forces west, you crossed Miller Crossing. If you wanted to destroy significant forces moving west, you set up at Miller Crossing and waited. She had tried to warn them 3 days ago. She presented Lieutenant Hargrove with a written intelligence report noting unusual radio chatter in the grid squares east and north of their patrol area. Chatter using a frequency hopping scheme she first documented 6 months ago and had tracked since. The chatter indicated coordination and deployment preparation. She used the phrase potentially prepared ambush site and requested air recon on approaches to Miller Crossing. Hargrove told her she focused too much on signal interference. He said it in that tone men sometimes use with her, not quite dismissive but leaning that way, implying her confidence was charming but probably unearned due to her experience level. She let it go, didn't push, logged it in her personal journal and moved on. Now, she was bleeding out under a rock while 2 enemy scouts moved through the ravine north of her position. And the unit that had left her was heading straight into a fight. She tried to warn them 3 days ago. Of course, she exhaled. She needed a radio. She had been carrying this thought since she first hid under the shelter. Her personal communicator was hit in the firefight. She was almost certain the same round that hit her side went through the radio, nose first, explaining the blood on the casing and silence on the channel. A direct hit on the body meant the main circuit was probably destroyed. But the transmitter module was separate, a design choice by people who understood that field units were often broken in peacetime, and redundancy was survival insurance. The transmitting module was placed in its own position. The bottom casing was shielded, and if the hit came through the body and not the module, she pulled out the radio and inspected it in the dim light under the shelter. The casing was cracked. A clean hole under an upward angle on the right side, meaning the bullet hit from below so the main board was gone. She flipped the radio. The bottom shield was intact. She almost laughed, but didn't because laughing would hurt and because 2 scouts in the North Ravine could be within hearing range. though her gut told her they were moving away. But she allowed herself 30 seconds of what felt like true satisfaction. She reached into her vest and pulled out a small multi-tool she kept in her left chest pocket. Pat Odom's recommendation given many years ago: always keep a multi-tool somewhere other than your main kit. Main kit gets lost. Main kit gets damaged. Your left chest pocket doesn't. Thanks, Pat. She began working on the radio. Took 47 minutes. She knew the time because she counted breathing intervals. Each interval about 15 seconds. She counted 187 intervals before she heard faint, beautiful static from the transmitter's emergency frequency. She bypassed the main circuit, wired the module directly to what was left of the power cell, and built the transmission channel from component wires she carefully stripped for 20 minutes. This wouldn't last long. The power source was damaged and running out. She estimated 2, maybe 3 minutes of transmission before it fully died. She had to use that time wisely. But before she turned the transmitter on, she listened again. This was what was happening to her. Hearing, she began to understand it was real. Not shock, blood loss, or desperate dreams. It was too precise for that. She heard the North Ravine again, but the 2 scouts were gone, replaced by a sound she'd periodically tracked the last 20 minutes. The low rhythmic sound of a large group slowly, cautiously moving on eastern approaches. Not 2 people, but more. She counted trajectory of falling footballs on her way. Her mind had learned to count effortlessly as a musician hears harmony without thinking of individual notes. She counted 12 to 15 people. The assault squad was moving toward Miller Crossing. She pressed the transmit button. This is Carter Emily 774 Echo Charlie, wounded and isolated. Coordinates: November Mike 77 under Granite Ledge in Southern Ravine. I have information on enemy assault squad. Please respond. Static was long enough for her to start counting whether she'd made a working signal or wasted 47 minutes of blood and focus on a radio that still couldn't connect. Then, Carter, this is Senior Sergeant Willis. You should be dead. She recognized the voice. Arthur Willis, base officer. She'd attended his briefings twice in 3 months. Good memory, steady hands. A man who records everything and trusts what he writes. I'm working on it, Senior Sergeant. I have little time. Miller Crossing. An ambush is prepared at Miller Crossing. I'm tracking the assault squad. 12 to 15 enemy forces moving from the east side. They use a frequency-hopping communication protocol I documented. It's in my 3-month intelligence dossier. Cross-reference file number 7 Charlie Foxtrot. They move to a prepositioned location. Ready. If the first platoon is moving west now, they're walking into them. Long enough pause to worry. Carter, how do you track enemy movement from your position? Morrow's report says you hear them. She said it sounded strange even to her. I know how that sounds. I'm telling you, I hear them. They have 2 scouts in the North Ravine moving to join the main unit. Main unit is about 800 meters east of the crossing. They wait for how long the first platoon takes to reach the crossing. Another pause. She heard voices in the background, as if the operations center had just woken to a problem. About 20 minutes, Willis said. His voice shifted. She recognized it. It was the sound of a man throwing away what he thought he knew and deciding to act on what he heard. She had immense respect for this sound. Most people couldn't do that. 2 minutes is enough, she said. Listen carefully because I'll say this once and then this radio will break. I need every word passed on to those who can respond. She spoke for 90 seconds, outlined approach vectors, probable firing positions based on terrain features remembered over 6 months. Likely heavy weapons locations derived from sound signatures. A low mechanical sound indicating something curved needing a stable platform, meaning elevation, meaning a ridge spur over the west end of the crossing. She indicated overlapping fire zones and defensive positions that would neutralize each threat vector. Also, the sequence the first platoon should take to hold some margin. She finished. Communication with units would switch to direct channel in about 4 minutes, meaning it was close to starting. First platoon must immediately reroute and take position. If done correctly, they will destroy the attack before it begins. If they continue west for 4 minutes, Willis said, they will lose most of them. Willis said it to Emily. She barely held back a smile hearing her name. There was something human and fitting in it. Do it, she said. Trust what you hear. I never gave you bad information. No, he replied. You didn't. The radio died. She carefully put it down. It deserved gentle handling. She coughed, pressed her back to the rock and took a deep breath. The wound throbbed deeply and rhythmically, meaning the field dressing worked, but her body no longer ignored what had happened. She was cold. Exhaustion was overwhelming in a way unlike any training she'd known. Not muscular fatigue, but systems running in emergency mode. Reserves. She heard assault squads to the east. She distinctly heard when they stopped, 3 minutes 40 seconds after she broke off communication. Stillness. That special quality of stillness from a trained group receiving new data and reassessing. Something changed on their side. She didn't know what, but their timeline was broken. She pressed her hand to the wound, counted her chest, listened to the mountains. And then, somewhere west, distant, clear and purposeful, she heard the sound of the first platoon turning around. She closed her eyes. In the darkness behind sentries, she saw Dale Morrow's face at the moment he dropped her. His gaze not guilty, but resolute. The look of a man doing what he decided beforehand. That's not a mistake. She'd seen that look before, on different faces, in different rooms. It was the look of a man who decided his worth and was no longer ready to reconsider. She put down the photo. She was good at systematizing things, had been since. She was short. Rain under the ledge started easing. Not stopping, just less fierce, steady and cold rather than fierce and cold. Thunder moved east. Lightning, when it struck, was now further away. The gap between flash and rumble stretched toward silence. She thought of scouts in the northern ravine. How she distinguished their steps. Heavier step favoring left, lighter step nervous. She wondered if she'd always been able or if something in shock, blood loss, isolation had unlocked it neurologically in a way that wouldn't survive the crisis. Didn't know. Set it aside. What she knew was that she was alive. She knew the unit that left her, if Willis acted quickly enough, would survive the night. She knew the assault squad east halted, meaning something changed. That meant either Willis broke through or something else she hadn't factored. She hated not knowing, systematized it and kept breathing. The rain softened, and then she heard a voice, coming from the northern ravine, not the scouts there but east, closer to main unit positions. A quiet, clipped voice speaking short phrases in a coded radio protocol she recognized without understanding the words. The rhythm was off. Not wrong, more like incorrect as a foreign language, not matching the equipment frequency it should come from. American rhythm, American intonation. Her mind caught that detail and wouldn't let go. She'd heard this pattern before but not in the field, 8 weeks ago, briefing room Tuesday morning. Typical dull meeting where people sat at folding tables and talked operational security. She took notes, as always. Then she asked about a specific radio protocol appearing in her signal logs. Lieutenant Hargrove said that frequency didn't match any known hostile object in the region. The voice in the northern ravine used that frequency. She pressed to the granite and did calculations she didn't want. One compromised frequency documented 3 months ago, rejected by Hargrove. One prepared ambush site noted 3 days ago, rejected by Hargrove. One tactical retreat leading her unit right into the kill zone by order of Morrow. An 18-year-old intelligence specialist left in the mud with a bullet wound. The wound was abandoned right at the moment her intellect would be most inconvenient. She thought about the word burden and what Morrow meant by it. You didn't leave me because I slowed you, she whispered to the deer, thinking mathematically. You left me because I knew. That knowledge settled in her chest with the pain, and she couldn't tell one from the other for a moment. 32 minutes passed since radio went dead. She knew this because she counted intervals. First platoon needed 18 to 22 minutes to deploy and hold if they reacted immediately to Willis's order. She'd already passed that time. Either it worked or it didn't. And either way, she couldn't do anything about how Miller crossed the granite ledge with one working radio and a bleeding wound. What she could do was not fall asleep. What she could do was keep listening. And what she heard next made her hold her breath for 4 whole seconds. Her name spoken by a voice outside. In the northern ravine, clear enough despite wind and half a mile distance to sound impossible. Yet it reached her ears with the clarity everything had carried since the ringing began. Carter. Female. Confirmed? Second voice closer. One scout returning. Morrow said she'd bleed out by morning. Morrow said a lot of things. Pause. The first voice softened and cautious. Find her. Emily moved before the phrase ended. Didn't run, her body didn't allow, but rolled sideways from under the ledge with a controlled movement causing a sharp inhale and new hot rush from the wound. She pressed to the right edge of the ledge where the rock jutted enough to break her silhouette and froze with such stillness that it wasn't hesitation but decision. They sent someone to confirm her death, meaning she was unfinished business, meaning everything she just calculated mattered. Cold and dark under the rock were true, and being right was the most dangerous thing she'd done that night. She had no radio. She had a multi-tool for dressing wounds, which did its work but was only half the protein bar she hadn't eaten, because food required energy. She was saving her pistol with 11 rounds in the magazine. She quickly ran an internal check. She almost forgot about the pistol, a sign how much her mind was occupied elsewhere, and was fiercely grateful for it one moment. 11 rounds, one shooter coming from the north. She already heard him, the lighter of the 2 scouts, nervous, steps chaotic and well-masked professionally. She understood fear. She worked right beside it. She synchronized his approach with breathing intervals and thought of Pat Odom and the lesson he taught her. Pat taught her on a gray November morning on a training ground in the wilderness. The lesson had nothing to do with weapons, qualifications, or field training, but on the difference between reactive and deliberate decisions. Reactive, Pat said, is when the situation controls you. Deliberate is when you control the situation. Fear is reactive. Fear plus decision is deliberate. You'll never get rid of fear, Emily. You'll make decisions faster than it can stop you. Fear plus decision. She made hers. She wouldn't shoot yet, only if necessary, because 11 rounds were limited, and a shot in this terrain would echo to the main unit and destroy the fragile margin she had left. She planned to let him get close enough to realize she wasn't where she should be, then be somewhere else. Problem was somewhere else in this terrain, state, and injury was a limited set of options. She chose the creek bed. It ran along the south part of the river, mostly dry in summer, but now carrying cold, fast water about an inch thick from rain runoff. 4 meters to shelter from where she sat, 4 meters of open ground between her and cover. In full health and daylight, it would have taken 2 seconds. In darkness, bleeding, and tactical silence, it would take 6 seconds and feel like 6 years. She moved anyway. She reached shelter in 8 seconds, slower than she wanted. She felt the wound pull, emitting a protesting sound she recognized. Instead of thinking, she pressed into the shallow creek bed, letting cold water wash over her right side silently. Cold actually helped ease pain. She noted this with distant, academic part of her mind capable of noticing such things even when the rest focused on not dying. The scout reached the ledge in 40 seconds. She heard him methodically clearing the space. Sounds of a man trained to clean thoroughly. She heard him find the discarded dressing pack and stripped radio wire. Fix broken casing. She heard a special silence as if someone considered evidence, updating knowledge. Mobile, he said into the radio. Not to her, but another voice, lifeless. Pause. Then find her before she finds a way to talk to anyone else. She lay in the creek bed listening as someone who never met her appraised her abilities precisely. And she felt the disorienting cold of being known by the wrong people. She also felt the water grow colder. She needed to move again. Staying in the creek meant shelter at the cost of hypothermia. Hypothermia was a slower version of Bullet's fate. She calculated the scout's position. He was still about 30 meters north-northeast of her current position on the ledge. and she began moving upstream against the current because moving upstream meant moving east, and moving east meant putting distance between her and the main element. Distance was the only resource she could create now. She moved in 10-meter steps. Move, stop, listen, calibrate, move again. The scout moved parallel to her but didn't know it. He searched south of the outcrop, working a grid that made sense if you assumed a wounded person would move toward the low ground. Most people, once injured, descended. It was an instant gravity-driven reflex, the body striving not to work against itself. Emily moved uphill. That cost her more. Much more. She felt it in every breath as the wounds burning turned into a deep, persistent pain she managed through sheer will, deciding not to deal with it now. But the climb meant moving toward the ridge, and the ridge meant the line of sight of the eastern approach. And the eastern approach was the station of the assault squad. Emily needed to see them, not just hear them. She needed to count them again, to confirm their composition, weapon placements, and retreat paths planned after the assault. Because if Willis moved the first platoon to defense positions, she had information, and if that information could prevent the assault on the ridge crossing, then the assault unit was about to cancel the operation and retreat. And the retreat route was the missing piece. She knew their frontline position. She knew their approach vector. She didn't know where they'd head if things went wrong. She climbed for 19 minutes. The ascent to the ridge took 19 minutes. She moved in short bursts punctuated by long pauses to listen and breathe, and quietly remind herself she was still standing, still able to move. That truth remained regardless of how much tried to disprove it. Reaching the ridge line, she pressed close and looked east. For the first time that night, she stopped relying on sound and saw with her own eyes what she'd been hearing. The assault unit was retreating. She saw moving figures retreating in a disciplined pattern that nonetheless quickened the specific rhythm of a unit ordered to abort the operation and professionally complying, without patience. 12 figures. She counted twice. 12. Moving northeast along the ravine back toward the elevation where they were positioned. And at the column's rear marched a figure with a measured gait of someone who never ran because running was for those who hadn't prepared correctly. A figure she recognized. She'd seen that walk in the briefing room 8 weeks ago. The same steady, measured gait, the same squared shoulders, the same total absence of hurry, as if the world moved around him, not him through the world. She didn't know his name but knew his gait, his rhythm, the frequency he used on the radio, and that he'd just ordered to find her and confirm her death. She knew his voice by how he said her name, Carter. A clinical detachment told her he knew her specifically, assessed her, defined her as a problem needing resolution. Such attentive focus meant she was right not only about Miller Crossing. She was right about everything. She pressed her face to the cold rock, breathing, thinking about her intelligence dossier. 6 months of data, signal logs, frequencies cross-referenced, pattern analysis Hargrove had thrice dismissed as noise. The file was in her personal journal, encrypted, with a backup on a server she accessed via a channel she created independently from the unit's main network. Because early in her career, she learned personal journals are only truly personal if you control the backup. That lesson came from Pat Odom, though Pat framed it differently. Trust your unit, Pat said, and back up everything where they can't reach it. Not because you don't trust them, but because you're 18 living in a world where folks had more time to make worse decisions than you. Then Emily thought that was cynicism. Now she thought it might be the most important thing she'd ever heard. The figure at the column's end stopped and turned. She felt his attention change, even from that distance. A person's body language shifts when he scans space and contemplates meaning. That implied what might be there. He looked along the ridge. Not specifically at her, but at the ridgeline where a field reconnaissance expert with a reason might ascend. She froze. He looked at her for a long moment, then turned to his column and resumed moving. Emily exhaled, holding her breath a moment. It ceased being just an exhale and became a decision. She had 12 names to match 12 faces. She had one face without a name. She had a frequency, a pattern, a Fourier signal log, and a wound that would need medical care in a few hours, or she'd be making decisions herself. She also had the memory of Sergeant Major Willis's voice saying Emily, in a tone of a man deciding to act on what he heard, now more important to her than almost anything else. She began descending the ridge. The scout south was still searching. She heard him. Now anyone within half a mile could hear him, as he apparently decided stealth mattered less than cover. She pushed through shrubs with the irritation of someone expecting easy confirmation but not getting it. She followed him without changing course, descending the west side ridge, putting 40 meters of safety between them which she maintained carefully during descent. At the ridge base she stopped, sat on a flat rock and conducted a full check. She held the wound. The dressing was soaked through but the inner layer still worked. She was losing blood, not fast enough to be an immediate crisis. She estimated 3 to 4 hours before calculations would materially change. 3 to 4 hours, a manageable window. 3 to 4 hours, the mission duration she could plan for. Cold weather. The creek had taken something she hadn't fully regained on the climb. Wet jacket and tactical vest made her heavier but still provided some insulation. She could endure cold. Cold was information. Cold precisely marked her limits, more useful than ignorance of her mental state. She lingered there longer than anywhere. She was angry. She realized that sitting on the flat rock. Anger pierced her like a second pulse. Not hot, reactive, but cold. It clarified the kind of anger that doesn't want to shout but document, to prove to those making decisions about her what those decisions really cost. Morrow had abandoned her. Hargrove hid her intel for 3 months. Someone with a level voice and American radio rhythm ordered her found and killed. And between all that, she rebuilt a broken radio and sent intelligence that stopped a bridge assault costing lives. Then climbed the ridge with a bullet wound to confirm her suspicions. And she did it all alone. In rain. In darkness. Relying on what wasn't finished yet. She was angry enough to use that as fuel. She almost did. Instead, she stood and oriented toward the clearing sky. Eastward. Then began moving west. Because west was Willis. West was the briefing room, encrypted files, and command waiting to hear everything she had to say, wanted it or not. For the last time, she heard the scout, far behind, now calmer and quieter. I can't find her. A steady voice on the other end paused before answering. Keep searching. She's not one to stop. Emily didn't know whether to feel threatened or strangely respected. She decided neither. She chose focus. She moved west through thinning rain and the uncertain gray sunrise. She listened to the mountains lowering around her. She counted her steps, thought about all she knew, all she could prove, all that would change once she left these mountains alive. She thought of Morrow's boot on her side. Thought of the word responsibility. Thought of 12. 12 figures retreating northeast, one at the rear knowing her name before she did anything more tonight beyond existing, being attentive, taking notes. And she gave herself a quiet, specific, undramatic promise, one she'd keep. That every one of those things would matter. That she would leave these mountains and sit before the people who needed to hear it. And she would tell them everything she knew, with the precision she'd honed her short career. And that would be enough. More than enough. That would be everything. She kept moving. Dawn kept rising. The mountain kept listening. And somewhere behind her, the scout who couldn't find her finally stopped looking. The habit lingered, and she stopped trying to time it. She heard his footsteps a quarter mile away, a full 12 seconds before the knocks, 3 measured taps. The definite rhythm of a man who had news and had already decided how to deliver it. She told Yates, sitting at the console with folded arms and a face frozen in the meticulous stillness of someone who had spent the last 90 minutes doing exactly what was needed and was ready to hand over duty, that it was Willis. Yates opened the door. Willis entered, closed the door behind him, and paused a moment, looking at Emily on the observation table. Fresh bandage, cleaned wound, the fact that she stood upright, oriented in space, and was clearly not exhausted. A time in passive mode that the wounded were supposed to take. Something in his expression affirmed it all without comment. The air assets reached the rally point at 5:58. He said 11 were still on site. They hadn't left in time. 11, she said. In the column I observed, there were 12 bodies plus 1 figure at the rear. The rear figure wasn't among those 11. Willis paused. He left before the air arrived. Someone warned him. That phrase hung in the room. Morrow turned on his radio at 4:51. Emily said passive sensors in this room picked up the transmission. It matched the frequency signature in my signal file, event number 19. Willis looked at Yates. Yates nodded once, pointing to the console without speaking. I know, he said. I took Morrow into custody at 5:10. He's under administrative arrest pending official review. Since I told him about the intercepted transmission, he's been silent. Pause. He asked for a lawyer. He was going to do that, Emily said. He realized when I crossed that perimeter that everything changed. He ran the same calculations I did but reached a different conclusion about the result. Willis moved to the console and looked at the archive Yates guarded. He stared at it a long time without touching. Hargrove is also under administrative arrest. He requested a medical exam. His voice was perfectly even. He's fine. No, said Emily, no. 11 personnel on site were detained. 3 had documents directly linking 2 of your signal events. Finally, he looked at her. Your case, Carter, the backup case. The chain of custody for this evidence will be the most crucial document in everything that follows. I need to know it's flawless. It is flawless, she said. Every record is time-stamped and tied to 3 independent servers. Access logs show only one user, my credentials, and the backup path was created outside the unit's network, meaning no administrative access that someone with Hargrove's clearance level could use. The case has been clean since the first record. Willis was silent a moment. Then he said, Colonel Marcus Webb arrives at 8 o'clock. He's from Criminal Investigations, sent straight from the office of the Inspector General. I called him at 3:30 from a personal line outside unit comms. Emily processed this. You called him before you knew about Morrow's transmission? I called him when I finished reading your case file. He said 19 cross-reference signal events over 4 years aren't something he'd sit on all night. She looked at him. You believed it so quickly. I believed it the moment told me Hargrove rejected the same pattern 3 times. He said, incompetence rejects things once, maybe twice if being generous. 3 times, the same analyst, same pattern, same outcome. That's a decision, not an error. He paused. I've known Hargrove for 7 years. I should have noticed sooner. Emily didn't respond directly, nothing useful to add. Some regrets need keeping until ready for reflection. And that was Willis, not her. Colonel Webb, she said instead, what does he want from me? Everything you have, in order, starting with the first signal event onward. Willis finally pulled out a paper notebook she identified as his most reliable info source, tied with neat, precise handwriting. He opened to a blank page. I want to review it with you before his arrival to confirm every point intersecting what you told me directly. How much time? He looked at the clock. 1 hour 40 minutes. That's enough, she said. They worked through it together. Emily from memory, her most reliable tool. Willis with his notebook, serving as independent confirmation of every point passing through his briefing room in 6 months. They found 11 direct intersections. 11 moments when she told him something. He wrote it down, and the notebook remained unaltered, a record of their talks. Hargrove attended 4 of those 11 conversations. 3 of 4. Sometimes the signal event occurred within 72 hours after the briefing. Same frequency, same pattern. The timing wasn't random. Timing linked to communication. Hargrove received intelligence from Emily's reports and passed it on before action could be taken. When she laid out the full event chain, Willis set the pen down and fell silent for a moment. He said, he used your intelligence briefs to warn them. Yes, those very reports you gave him. Yes, that's why he officially rejected them. Not to conceal but to control, ensuring official records held nothing that could justify action, while he sent actual contents privately on his own schedule. That's my assessment. She said he acted as a filter. Everything I gave him was vetted. What was dangerous to the network was officially rejected and privately passed on. What wasn't dangerous was also rejected for consistency. She paused. He was cautious. He rejected even what meant nothing, so his pattern of refusals itself wouldn't form a pattern. But I tracked those refusals with major events, and the correlation holds. Willis looked at her. You tracked his refusals. I track everything, she said. He picked up the pen again and wrote something in the notebook. She didn't ask what. She trusted whatever it was accurate and would stay that way. At 7:40, the door opened without knocking and an unfamiliar man entered. Mid-50s, he held the stillness born of decades interrogating unwilling subjects. He first looked at Willis, then at Emily, holding his gaze on her long enough for her to understand he evaluated more than just her wound. "Colonel Webb," Willis said, standing. "Senior Sergeant." Webb looked at Emily again. "Carter." "Sir." She said, "You look like you had a rough night." "I had an enlightening night," she said. Something twitched at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement more interesting than expected. He set a briefcase on the table, a vintage one, real leather with real clasps, and sat across from her. He folded his hands and said, "Start at the beginning. Don't retell. No commentary. Just tell me what you observed, documented, and in what order." She began at the start. She spoke for 53 minutes. Webb interrupted 6 times, not to challenge but to clarify sequence and check if something was direct observation or inference, to confirm timestamps against his own records. He had records. He arrived with records. She didn't know where from and didn't ask. But their existence told her Willis's 3:30 call put in motion what happened fast, and info reached someone already watching that direction. At minute 40, she told him about the figure at the rear of the retreating column. The one clearing the staging area before forces arrived. The one who knew her name before tonight. Webb's pen stopped moving. "Describe the movement." "Same pattern," he said quietly and carefully. She described it. Steady, measured step, squared shoulders, complete absence. Urgency, the way he stopped at the column's rear and turned to look at the ridge. Not scanning, not examining, but looking with an intent focus of someone conducting a final check, not reacting to events. Webb wrote something that took longer than his other notes. "You mentioned an American intonation," he said. "On the radio in the northern Ravine." "Yes, and the frequency pattern is documented in your file as Event 11. Event 11 cross-references with Events 14 and 16. The same operator all 3 times. The intonation pattern is consistent. You can identify individual operators by intonation pattern. By intonation and microtiming between syllables," she said. "The same principle as voice recognition but applied to encrypted transmissions where the voice itself is masked. Timing patterns persist after encryption." Webb put down the pen. He looked at her expression unreadable. It was something between professional assessment and something more personal. The expression of someone faced with something making him reconsider prior assumptions. How long have you done this?" He said it wasn't quite a question. "I've identified operators by speech rhythm since I was 16, she said. "I began with radio broadcasts, news programs. I could tell when a substitute anchor replaced the regular one because the microrhythm changed. That was a game then. I took it seriously when I joined intelligence training and realized it had operational significance. Your evaluations describe your audio processing skills as exceptional." "My assessments were written by Hargrove," she said, "so they should be read carefully." Webb picked up the pen again. "In your assessments, your audio processing skills are exceptional, and your judgment is sometimes overly confident for your experience level." She understood. He said he repeated that 3 times over 3 evaluation cycles. In line with his approach to everything else, she said, "Dismiss the analysis, assess the analyst, create a record making the pattern look like personal judgment, not systematic suppression." She paused. "Smart. I'll give him credit for that. If tonight hadn't happened as it did. Yes, those evaluations would officially recognize who I am and how seriously to take my work." Webb looked at her again with the same unreadable expression. Then he said, "The figure at the column's rear, operator from Event 11. He paused. "I have a name." A special silence fell. The silence when something theoretical becomes specific, when a silhouette vaguely felt in the dark finally steps into the light. Emily was silent. She waited. "His is Richard Calloway," Webb said. "Former Department of Defense intelligence officer, resigned 8 years ago under circumstances officially described as voluntary departure for personal reasons. Unofficially, He was subject to an internal investigation closed without results 14 months after it began. His voice was completely flat. Over the last 4 years, he's featured on lists of persons of interest in 2 separate investigations. Neither yielded solid evidence as evidence was censored. Emily said, "That's the current hypothesis." Webb said, "Your signal logs are the first documentary proof of his direct operational link with units in this region. Identifying the rhythm of Event 11, if confirmed by independent acoustic analysis, indicates he personally participated in radio communication during an operation now directly tied to Hargrove and Morrow with conclusive evidence." He paused. "This is the chain, Carter. A chain we couldn't build before." She thought of Tuesday mornings and forgotten briefing rooms. She thought of 6 months of meticulous work, of 19 entries in a backup file outside the unit network because she, at some level she couldn't fully express then, knew the unit's network couldn't be trusted. She thought of Hargrove's voice. "You pay too much attention to signal noise." He knew her personally. She said that until tonight, he knew her name, age, and capabilities. Meaning Hargrove forwarded her personal evaluations describing her sound processing skills directly to Calloway. Webb nodded slowly. "That means Calloway saw you as a network threat before tonight. And Morrow was ordered to eliminate that threat if possible." She said the ambush was linked not only to Miller Crossing. Leaving her in the ravine was planned, not improvised. They needed her dead before she could report. The weight of those words was felt in the room. Willis, who stood quietly for most of the talk, made a sound, not quite a word, but conveying something precise and serious. Webb said, "We'll need your formal sworn testimony before a military tribunal operating entirely outside our command hierarchy. This process will take time." "How much time? Days? Maybe a week." "Meanwhile," she said, Calloway is in the shadows." Webb agreed. "Calloway is in the shadows. We have agents moving known contact points from intel from your radio intercepts, but he's a pro with 23 years in intelligence and the advantage we're actively hunting him now." He paused. "He also knows you survived the..." Morrow told him. She said, "Morrow's transmission at 4:51. Webb said, "Yes, he knows you got out of those mountains. He knows you have the file. He knows what he thought he was doing became much more complicated over the past 3 hours." She thought of the steady voice that said, "She's not one to stop. He'll try again," she said. It wasn't a question but the absolute certainty with which a person defines an operational variable. "He'll try again," Webb confirmed. "That's why from now you're under protocol protection. You don't go anywhere without my office-approved escort. You must not communicate by channels not independently verified. And under no circumstances attempt solo action in this investigation." She met his eyes. "Respectfully, Colonel, solo work is how the evidence you have was acquired." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm telling you directly, not expecting one instruction to suffice." There was something off in his voice. Humor, but alongside the tone of someone respecting the interlocutor and adjusting approach accordingly. "You're 18. You have a gunshot wound. You haven't slept for roughly 22 hours. Tonight, your body will make decisions without your reason. And I'd prefer you to be under medical supervision behind a locked door when that happens." She wanted to argue. She felt the concrete counterarguments shaping in her mind, a logic of action, a to-do list. They lined up in her mind with the automatic efficiency of a system that didn't know how to stop. Then she felt beneath it all what she kept at bay all night. Exhaustion. Uncontrolled fatigue she cataloged and normalized. Deep structural depletion, a body running on reserves for 22 hours beginning to show. Her hands shook. They'd been shaking for a while. She noticed and put it aside, but now looking at them, knew setting them aside was no longer a viable strategy. "Okay," she said. Webb nodded. "The file," he said. "I need full access credentials to the backup path before you sleep." She gave him the credentials. Step by step, she led him through the backup path in the same methodical sequence she used to create it. She watched as he accessed the file on the console, saw his face as he opened the first subfile, then the second and third, and saw the moment the scale of it became clear. 19 records, 6 months, cross-referenced with 3 independent databases, timestamps, annotations, source citations. He looked at her, closing the file. He stared for a long time with that expression she'd seen Willis wear before, the one she finally learned to read as a reset. "Exceptional work," he said. "I know," she said, not arrogantly but precisely. Something changed in his expression, and this time a barely perceptible smile appeared. "Sleep, Carter. We'll talk more when you've rested 4 hours." Willis escorted her out. He was in the medical ward. They were silent most of the way, the right choice. Nothing more to say except, "Could have been better." Later, adrenaline and with clarity, outside the medical ward, Willis stopped and said something unexpected. "Morrow went through the same program as I did," he said. "The same training cycle, same instructors. I sponsored his application 2 years ago." He paused. "I want you to know I understand the gravity of what you brought me tonight. It was not just information. It was a decision to trust someone when trust gave you good reason to end it." She looked at him. She considered possible responses. Measured, professional, maintaining needed distance, all costly. She said, "You kept everything in the notebook you carried. You acted on my transmission without waiting for confirmation. You called Webb on a personal line before you knew about Morrow's signal." She paused. "You earned that." Willis nodded once. A nod with great weight, saying little, the most honest gesture of that sort. He left. She entered the medical ward. Yates was already there, transferred from the comm room. Her role defending the archive apparently done and officially recorded, though she said nothing. With the quiet, reasoned calm she'd shown all night, she helped Emily to bed. Emily sat on the edge, looked at the wall, and felt 22 hours crash in like a tide, restrained then released by her will. She thought of Calloway's steady retreat, now moving in a world more dangerous for him and her. The investigation led by Webb would take time. Calloway had time and resources over 23 years to vanish in official systems. 11 detained could be pressured or held. Morrow and Hargrove might cooperate or calculate. Network loyalty remained best option. Many variables. She was used to variables. Less used to being the one protected instead of protecting. The protection protocol Webb described: escort, verified channels, locked door. She understood the logic. Agreed even. It was the right operational stance given threat assessment, and she was too honest to pretend otherwise. She just didn't know how to be the protected. Never had to learn. Yates approached, checked the bandage again. "You should eat something," she said, expecting obedience and going to get it. Emily ate a saved protein bar. Then another Yates got, drank water until her body stopped asking. She leaned back, looked at the ceiling, listened to the bass moving around. Somewhere in Ops Center she heard Webb's quiet, purposeful voice. Instructions turning to action fast. She heard radio coordination rising and shifting, shaping simultaneous operations. Somewhere far she heard a vehicle leaving east. She didn't hear Calloway. He was out of reach even of her extraordinary hearing. Moving in the dark with the steady pace she remembered from the ridge. Moving, knowing what she'd created, what it meant, what awaited her. She thought, "I'll find you. Not tonight. Not while lying in the medical ward under protocol protection with a gunshot wound and 22 hours unpaid debt to her body." But now the file was with Webb and the signal logs held in independent storage. The chain built link by link over 6 months on Tuesday mornings and forgotten briefings on a backup server beyond reach of those trying to erase her. Calloway told his operative she wasn't one to stop. And he was right. She closed her eyes. She listened to the base conversations and thought about everything unfolding. 11 detained, Morrow and Hargrove under arrest, air assets tracking retreat route, Webb's investigation spreading from her backup file like something long compressed finally expanding. She thought of Pat Odom's words. Incredible. She thought of Willis's notebook. She thought of that moment Dale Morrow hit the ground and turned away. And she thought of how that moment, that calculated cruelty, became the mistake that destroyed everything. Because if he'd just left her without that final check, she might have been too disoriented, too wounded to catch the signal in the northern ravine. She might not have climbed the ridge, might have just escaped and passed on her intel, never knowing the transmission signature, the link to Calloway, or the concrete evidence web was now piecing together that couldn't be dismissed or hidden. Morrow's thoroughness was his undoing. His quest for absolute certainty gave her the 30 extra seconds of willpower needed to do more than survive. She almost thanked him, but changed her mind. She leaned back on the bed, breathing in fours, wrapped in sounds of the bass like a mountain settling after a storm. Still active, still moving, along paths she helped define. She was still in the room when her breath shifted. The ceiling vanished from sight, and for the first time in 22 hours, all listened to the sounds. She fell asleep, and as she slept, Richard Calloway drove north on an unmarked road with the calm of a man who thought he had time. He was wrong, but didn't know it yet.